Hi, my name is Jan Priddy. My family's been in Arch Cape since 1911. My mother was Fay Gordon Smith, married my father, Arthur Henry Priddy, whose own father came from Essex. But Fay Gordon Smith was the daughter of Fay Fletcher Jackson, and she was named for her mother. That's why she was also Fay, and her father, who was Gordon Keyes Smith. Gordon Keyes Smith's great aunts owned a house in Portland and the property at Arch Cape, and they bought that for $10 in 1911. One of the aunts ran a business school, a school for businessmen, not a secretarial school, but the equivalent of what they would have had in the over 100 years ago of an MBA. And famous people went to her school, is the story anyway. Her sister was an artist, mostly a painter, and there were paintings hanging in the Portland house. The two of them had the house built and used it first in 1912. And at that time, Arch Cape had no road. It had no electricity or running water. It was a true cabin in the truest sense of that term. There was an outhouse just north, near a little seasonal creek. And the house itself had an upstairs and a downstairs, and a wood-burning fireplace and a wood stove. And that was their only heat. Water had to be hauled in buckets from the creek. And I honestly don't know if they hauled it from the seasonal creek, which would have been 100 feet away, or if they had to go all the way to Arch Cape Creek to the south, which was a considerable distance, but would have been running all year round even then. So my mom and her older sister, Marcia, when they were little girls, spent all their summers at the beach. Cousins would also come to the beach. So my grandmother would have, I don't know, 7 or 8 or maybe more children she'd be looking after. And often she was by herself doing that. This was, again, in the 20s, and there was no running water, there was no electricity. So she was cooking on a wood stove, she was hauling water. A daily wagon came from the north, from Cannon Beach, and brought milk and some produce. They walked long distances into Cannon Beach and roller skated in what is now the Coaster Theater. They picked berries, she cooked meals, they raked crabs, they gathered clams. It was an idyllic time. They'd go out first thing after breakfast and not come home until night. And the only chore they had, as far as I know, was on Tuesdays, they had to clean the chimneys of the oil lanterns because that was the only lighting they had. But since they were there from Memorial Day to Labor Day, it was mostly light, fairly late into the day, and of course, light first thing, early in the morning. So the daddy train ran from Portland to Seaside, and a lot of families, and this was a custom from the East Coast too, in the hotter summer months, is the wives and children went to the beach and the father stayed in town to work. Mothers with children would be in Gerhardt or Seaside or perhaps Cannon Beach, more likely. And the daddy train would bring the fathers at least as far as Seaside, and from there they'd get a ride to wherever they needed to go. It was a little longer to get to Arch Cape because there was no highway. There was no way to get to Arch Cape at all, in fact, except on the beach. And the cars could get there at low tide, usually, by either driving out on the sand around Hug Point or on the rocky road that was built into the cliff, into the that bluff at Hug Point. These days, there's just barely a remnant of that of that road. You can find the path that was blasted into the stone, and little bits of concrete from where it used to be a completely smooth concrete roadway that was poured on top of the rock. And it was still pretty clear when I was a child, but a lot of it has washed away. And every year there's less and less sign of the concrete. I don't think current visitors notice it at all. I don't think they see it. They just see the stone, and they see a lot of barnacles and a lot of tiny little mussels. But they did build a highway, and there are photographs showing first the rough roadway that was cut inland and all along through Arch Cape, and then it came to the Cape itself. And that is a massive piece of rock. It was too high to go over. They couldn't go around it either way because the ridge line from Arch Cape, from the actual Cape at the south end of the community, is very tall. So they blasted a tunnel through the Cape. And that was done in the mid-30s in order to continue Highway 101, which now runs from Canada to Mexico. In the process of blasting through that stone, they dropped sandstone onto the beach from the cliffs. It was not intended. It's just what happened as a result of the blasting. And the arches of Arch Cape, that was a double arch on the Cape itself. You can't get to it, but when they blasted for the highway, it filled up with rubble. My step-grandmother, Genevieve, believed that the arch itself had collapsed, but it didn't collapse. It just got filled up. And I remember as a child walking around the Cape and getting to where the arch was and seeing a little opening of maybe a few inches. And then every year as I aged, every year I went back, it was more and more open. What happened is the ocean just slowly cleared the rubble. And eventually the entire double arch was exposed, but the ocean wasn't done. It eventually broke the middle pile, and now it was like a stalactite and a stalagmite that met in the middle, and what happened is it broke right in the middle, and it's washed away so that you can barely see where it is below, depending on how much sand has washed in. But you can see up above, you can see where it dips down, where the original post of stone would have been, and it's quite tall. It's I don't know, it's much taller than me, 10 or 15 feet. I have photographs of the arches that my grandfather took. I have photographs of the old mill. The south end of Arch Cape, the road is called the Cedar, well, it was Cedar Mill Road, but it's called Mill Road now, and that's because there was a cedar mill at one time, way up at the top of the water where they could use the force of that creek to run machinery. My grandfather, after they were divorced and after World War II, moved to the Oregon coast to the Arch Cape house, dismantled it on location, and rebuilt it as a one-story house. He married Genevieve, they moved to that house, and he suffered a series of strokes around 1951 through 1953, which almost totally incapacitated him. It put him in bed. Doctors told his wife, Genevieve, that he would never walk, he would never talk, he would never get out of bed again. But Genevieve was a very determined person. She had a PhD in nursing. She was head nurse at Seaside Hospital after she married my grandfather, and especially after his strokes, because she needed the income. She got my grandfather out of bed and walking and talking. She wrote a book about it, Care of the Patient with a Stroke, which featured drawings based on photographs of my grandfather as she rehabilitated him. That book, it's still referenced in other books. After she'd worked in the hospital a while, then she began teaching nursing at the community college in Longview. During World War II, she worked in the nursing corps, the Army Nursing Corps, and flew all around. She gained her pilot's license even after she married my grandfather. That was part of the deal, actually, that she made with him, that she'd been a single person for a long time. And of course, he'd been married twice before, divorced once and widowed once. And she agreed to marry him if he would allow her to continue to fly. So she did, and she flew them to Idaho. She flew them across Canada. After he passed away, several years after that, she remarried. And her second husband, Colin Campbell, had owned a motel in Arch Cape. And that would have been right on Highway 101, about half a mile north on the west side of the highway. Sadly, he passed away during a hip replacement surgery, and Genevieve passed away in 1978, and the house was left to me. And my husband and I moved into the house in 1979. Our first son was born there in 80, our second in 82, and in 1984, we tore the roof off the one-story house and turned it back into a two-story house because we needed the space for two children. Well, I taught in the Seaside School District from 1979 until 2019. Because I taught junior English, and I taught almost every student that came through Seaside High School between the 90s until about 2015. There was a time when if a person was under the age of 40, they had me as a teacher. And that was really lovely. That was really lovely. I knew real estate brokers and insurance salesmen and attorneys and doctors and nurses and people who did bookkeeping and people who ran small shops, local carpenters and contractors and electricians were all my students. That was and probably will remain one of the great experiences of my life.